Those of you who don't know us, we are, well, I'll introduce myself. I am a coach's wife in Central Illinois and the author of Lessons from the Sidelines, which is going to release here at the end of August. And Anne, tell us about yourself.
I am a coach's wife in Missouri and author of 2 devotionals, Cultivating Joy and The God Blanket. And Beth has been mentoring me on writing and stepping into exciting things for a couple of years now. So that's kind of where our relationship came from.
Yeah, and Anne is featured in a section of my book. And one of the things that we have talked about for the last couple of years is pursuing your calling. And so we just wanted to take some time to have a little conversation about that and kind of give you an insight into the conversations we've been having for the last couple of years, because we're in a hard season right now as coaches, as coaching families. And it would be silly to ignore that. We just, we're hearing that states are closing down fall sports, and, our husbands both coach football. And so, we've heard that in Virginia, they're thinking about, or they're definitely not going to have fall football, but, we're not sure what's going to happen. And that's scary, right? Because that could mean not having a full salary. And so there's a lot of unknowns right now.
Yeah.
And so we know that there's just a lot of unknowns. And we've been there before because we've walked through seasons of unknowns when our husbands have been without jobs. And so we just wanted to spend some time encouraging you guys today.
Yeah, I think kind of where we wanted to start as Beth and I were looking through this is that there is so much unknown, but that God is not surprised by anything. Like 2020 is not shocking God. Like nothing is falling through his fingers. And I remember even putting together an article not that long ago, just saying that no matter what our seasons end up looking like, our family seasons, our sports seasons, whatever it happens to be, like God knew exactly where we were going to be and what resources we would have. And so even as, we're heading into the school year starting, I think we all have to realize that we are surrounded by a God who knows what's coming, who knows what has come, and who knows what provision we need in the middle of that. And we can put a lot of hope in that, I think. And Beth gave me a verse here that I wanted to share that I think speaks to that. We're going to look here in Romans 5. Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God, our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace and now in which we now stand. And we boast in the hope of the glory of God. Not only so, but we glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who's been given to us. And so that was Romans 1-5. And I think there sometimes maybe we feel cliche or we feel silly saying, oh, God's got this, God knows. But truly, like, that's not a shameful space to be. And verse 5 says that really is an amazing place to be. And I think I've said this repeatedly since the coronavirus started. If we don't control the narrative, it's going to control us. And the narrative really, the true narrative is always in Christ, right? That we are suffering through this, but that is going to produce perseverance and character and hope in us when we are trusting in where God's taking us. So that's kind of where we're landing. And we're going to go through quite a few things today, but we just wanted to land in this space to encourage you that you can be secure during this time of insecurity, I think is maybe the short way to say it.
That is great. And I love that. If we don't control the narrative, it will control us. And I think we all have our moments. I will be honest, when this whole thing started here in Illinois, our governor shut us down fast and furious. We had to give up our spring break trip, which ended up being fine because we were supposed to go to a water park, which ended up shutting down anyway. So, spring break, I work from home remotely full time. So I'm kind of used to, just being home on my own, but that turned into working home remotely with a house full of people who were taking up all my Zoom bandwidth. And then it just didn't go away. I mean, then everyone was adjusting to um, online school. And, thankfully my kids are older. And so, they did their own thing, and Ordell was around to be able to help them with questions and help make sure they were meeting deadlines, which was great because I was on a book deadline and I still had a full plate of work. But we have been white knuckling it since March. And now we're entering what's traditionally the busiest, most intense part of the calendar season. And we haven't had our traditional time of rest. We haven't had that time of family, like getting away. And like my husband usually takes the boys on a camping trip and just has a special time with them. We have celebrated all of our birthdays and our anniversary in quarantine. Like
Right.
it's been junky. And I think it's okay to admit that. But at the same time, I'm not going to let that be the narrative of this year, because I don't want to look back at this year and think like nothing good came from it. And I think that as we think about the reality of being a coach's wife, like part of the reason I was like, oh, we'll be fine is because we were kind of made for this season, right? Like we're born multitaskers. We know what it's like to juggle chaos. We can do this, but we aren't used to doing it for this long. And we aren't used to doing it when we don't know what tomorrow brings. We're used to being able to look at the schedule and knowing weeks in advance where, what those late nights are going to be and when we need to order pizza and when we don't. And right now, we don't even know if there's going to be toilet paper on the shelves when we go to the grocery store. And, and I mean, I think most places do, but I was just talking with a coach's wife last night who still can't get her favorite toilet paper in Minnesota. And so, I mean, it's just weird. Like we're weird. And so we've had to even, like reprioritize something, right? Everything takes longer. And, but I think that when we add a little perspective to the situation and we take some time to say, we can live in the both and. We can do hard and we can say, I still trust you. Like I'm sad, but I still trust that God is in this with us. That we can move forward. And so I think to frame this, I want to look at Genesis 33, because Moses talks about his calling directly with God. And he does a great job in this short section of verses, Exodus 33, 12 through 18. He says, it says, Moses said to the Lord, you've been telling me, lead this people, but you have not let me know whom you'll send with me. So he specifically says, hey, you've told me exactly what my calling is.
Right.
But you have not given me all the tools and all the information yet. I don't feel secure in what's going on here. And so he says, I know you by name and I have found favor with you. If you're pleased with me, teach me your ways so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people. And so he's not only saying like, I need you, but he's also interceding on behalf of the people that he's been put in charge of. So he's already taking authority in his calling, but he's saying, I'm going to need a little bit more help here. And I think that it shows like, he really does understand God in a unique way, and he's humble. Like he understands this relationship. And so then verse 14 says, the Lord replied, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. And that jumped out to me that in this, like, okay, you're about to go, like they were in the desert. This was not ideal. Moses was not happy with this calling that God had given him. And yet he was doing it. And he said, okay, but here's the deal. Like, I need you to give me the tools. And then God like one-ups him and he says, I'm going to come with you in this, and I'm going to give you rest. And I just think that right now is a promise that we should be seizing hold of.
Mm-hmm.
And then in verse 15, it says, then Moses said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us from here. So he's like, okay, so here's the deal. You've told me your presence is coming with us. I don't want to take a step unless we're lockstep with you. So
Right.
like, I don't want to like go and then like you'll show up later. Right. So, and like, so you do that with your kids. Sometimes like, I'll catch up, but Moses is like, no, I want to be with you. And so then verse 16, how will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with our people unless you go with us? What will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? And the Lord said to Moses, I will do the very thing you have asked because I am pleased with you and I know you by name. And I think that like it also defines their relationship. And God is affirming like you're doing well, like you're doing your calling well. And like God, and we also know in the New Testament that God knows us by name. So this is also like something that we can claim for ourselves. But this is the part that I just like, it cracks me up. The next thing Moses said is, now show me your glory. And it's like, okay, so now we're going to just pray bold prayers, And I just, it's so funny to me because here he's like, I don't want to move without you. Okay, now show me your glory.
Uh-huh.
But, it shows so much about their relationship. I think it shows so much about Moses' personality. But as we think about our calling in this season, I think there's so much that we can seize hold of here because there's so many layers to this calling that, what does this look like when we apply this to marriage? Like how do we do this well with our kids home when they're home, when they're not home? And how do we do this and not find ourselves even more exhausted than we already are? And so that's kind of the three sections I want to make sure that we cover. And Anne, when we were talking about this before, you had some great insight, particularly about kids. And so if you want to just start there.
Yeah. Well, let me take a back step just a second. Like as you were reading through that, I think the way that Moses and God conversed was a beautiful pattern for us. So I think I've had that conversation between me and God and me and my husband in the last 5 hours. Because we have just now launched back into football. I don't know how long it's going to last, but he's gone again. And so it showed this beautiful pattern of we need to let God know, here are all the ways that I don't see how I can get this done. Like I believe you've called me to write. I also believe you've called me to be a wife and you've called me to be a mother. Like, I don't know how to get all that done. Like Moses didn't try, like you said earlier, white knuckle it. Moses didn't try to be some sort of hero in front of God. He was humble. And he said, I don't get it, man. Like, I don't know how I'm supposed to get this taken care of. Right. And so I've had that conversation with God and with my husband today, I believe. And then he says, show me your glory. Like, you called me to this. I'm going to tell you all the ways that I, in my human nature, just don't see how this can get it done. Go be God, right? Like, I hope people that listen to this just feel the confidence to ask God to be God, to approach the throne of grace with confidence. Like sometimes, I think sometimes even as women, we get some sort of message that we're supposed to be meek. And
Mm,
so we don't ask God for everything that he could do. And we're too timid in his
mhm.
promises. Like, we serve the God of the universe. So ask the man, ask
Yep.
him to do big things, right? So anyway, I just thought that pattern, like as
Yeah.
we're in this difficult season, reading over those verses again and again, just seeing the pattern of Moses towards God, may be helpful in our prayers and just in our thinking about our callings. But then to the question
Mm,
that you asked about with children, when we were talking, my children are 8 and 5, and I've been doing this writing and speaking thing and kind of stepping into my calling for a couple years now, and I've perpetually struggled with whether or not I was sacrificing in one area or the other, not handling one area or the other right. But I think the thing we talked about the other day that I thought was so important is that it is important for my children to see what it looks like for someone to chase something that God has asked them to do.
mhm.
And so I have a boy and a girl. And so we even talked about this in terms of gender stuff. As a coach's wife, I am in a marriage where from the outside, would be easy for our kids to perceive that daddy's job is more important because it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of emotional energy. It takes finances sometimes, all these things. And I want my son to see what it means to watch his dad make time to let me chase what God has asked me to do, which Tim has done beautifully.
Yes.
And I also want my daughter to see what it looks like to be able to be in a marriage where somebody has a really public career or a really big job that takes a lot of time sometimes, and that her calling from God still matters. Like, I
Mhm.
think that's why we parent, is to make examples out of things, right? And I want them to see that life isn't easy and that sometimes you have to work hard and persevere and show grit and fail sometimes. And so my kids get to see that. I didn't know, there's times that I'll be writing and they're like, "Mom's, how's writing going?" And I'll say, "Today it's really hard." Like, I don't pretend like I've got it all together. And I think that that's valuable for my kids. Obviously, we don't air all our dirty laundry with our children, but I think it's okay for them to see us chasing what God has us to do and seeing what the struggle is in that, and then also celebrating the times that we're victorious. The latest book that I put out a year ago or whatever, my kids made like fake versions of it themselves and brought it to me because they were more excited than anybody because they'd watched me
Yeah.
chase something. And I think that was an example for them, especially when we're in a family where my husband's job is such a public profile.
Yeah. And one thing you said when we were talking before is when we are carrying that guilt about not doing everything, we can reframe those thoughts around our kids.
Yeah.
And so we should be remembering that we're modeling those examples because we've got those little eyes on us, and that um, pursuing our calling is always that obedience. And even just talking through that with our kids is going to be a good thing
Yep.
for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, okay, so you kind of hit on it a little bit already, but one of the things I said in my book is because marriage is a partnership, we must take care to clarify the plans God has, or you must take care to clarify the plans God has for your life while still honoring your husband. We will do this because when we live out our callings as God created us to do, we delight our Creator. Um, and that is and that's our greatest aim. And I fully believe that we had our calling before we got
Mhm.
married. However, that when we partner well together in marriage, a lot of times our strengths and our spouse's strengths actually can come together in a way that can help us to flourish in our calling.
Mhm.
And so, and I think we've both seen that happen in our
For sure.
marriages. Yeah. And so, but it doesn't just like happen, right? There's some
Not
more.
her.
So like, what does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, so it's been interesting in a couple ways. I think there's a lot of coaches' wives that feel like they have to take the back seat to
Mhm.
their husbands' careers and their husbands' plans and their husbands' moves and all the things. And I've certainly, not that he ever intentionally did that, but there's been times where I'm like, oh man, we're moving again, or whatever it is that's been hard. And then once I finally, because backstory for people that don't know, I like fought off this calling for like 10 or 15 years and then really have just stepped into it in the last couple of years. And I just saw God's grace in a really neat way that Tim had already been through the fire of chasing his calling. And
Mm.
so those times when I ran up against obstacles, he was able to encourage me and lead me in a way that he wouldn't have been able to if we had both chased it at the exact same time. And
Mm.
so, I mean, I think God would have made a way, but I just thought that was a neat way that God used the delay in me stepping into my calling. And then, I mean, just in personality wise, I am, I'm kind of a Jesus loving hippie. I just like things to develop organically. I could kind of float through life. Like that is just me. And I'm married to a visionary.
Mhm.
And if he had not at times been like, you need to stop hiding this gift. You need to start writing more. You need to start chasing things you've done for me too, Beth, honestly. Um, I would have written my little things and left them on my computer and not told anybody about it because I'm like, oh, well, that's just nice and pleasant and easy. And so I love the way that our personalities have worked that way. And because Tim is so intense and so goal oriented, there's times when, because of who I am, I'm able to say, bro, you got to chill, right? Like you've got to relax a little bit. You need to take care of yourself. Like I think he'll live longer because he's married to me and I will accomplish far more because I am married to him. So that's been a good compliment for us.
Yeah. Well, and I think you bring up a good point that before we go on, I want to hit back on that caretaker thing because we are moving into that part of the calendar where we just kind of naturally, even if we are equal partners, we just know all
Right?
coaches, they're going to absorb the majority of the calendar. And so our life kind of falls into the margins of the time. And so, well, traditionally anyway, we don't really know what this year is going to look like. And so, this might be the year where we have to be okay with swapping some roles or we might need to pause and reevaluate taking on a side hustle or, who's going to be doing homeschooling and who's going to be out working and those types of things. And so open communication without an ego is going to become much more important if it isn't something we've already had to do. I think we've already kind of gone through a little bit of that. I mean, like I know there's been a lot of wives who've been like, is he going back to work sometime? I'm really sick of being coached. Like I don't need to be coached through putting the dishes in the dishwasher or whatever it is. Where like our poor men have just like they kind of lost their season and they needed in the spring and they needed that outlet and now it's looking like it's gonna happen again and we ache with them because we're missing out on our ministry and our opportunities to pursue that aspect of our calling but at the same time reframing it, this could be that window for us to pursue something with a little bit more depth
Right.
or intentionality that we don't normally have because we're focusing on the season, and and in all positive ways. Usually, you know,
Right.
we're loving on our team, we're loving on the parents, we're loving, we're taking care of the home team while he's out pursuing his calling, whatever that looks like. But maybe this is that small window of opportunity to not just take on a job, but to take some actionable steps in a job that's within your calling in a way that the Lord has actually been nudging you for a while.
Right.
Not avoiding something.
Right. Well, and as you say that, like, I think there's going to be some of us that don't have seasons, right?
Yeah,
There's
totally.
going to be, and even if your state doesn't fully cancel your football season, I think there are possibilities that you're going to have stretches where coach got diagnosed positive with COVID, or a player did, or whatever. And you have 2 weeks where normally you would be grinding, that you're just all home and there's space and time. And so I think one of the biggest things that I've been talking about is saying that this time doesn't have to be a burden, that it can be a gift. And as you talk about that caretaking role, it is so common for us to be like, especially during the fall, right? So with football coaches' wives, right? During the fall, to be like, okay, I'm in major caretaker mode. And we don't have a lot of taking care of ourselves. We do our best, but you kind of just have to get through there. And it would be easy for us, if coach doesn't have a season, to think, okay, now I need to like take care of him and make him feel better for the next several months.
Yeah, that's true.
Of course we will be supportive of them, but I think I'm just wanting wives to hear that maybe if the season pauses or the season gets shut down, not just to look at that as awful, that maybe there's this space where something you've been wanting to do or something you've been wanting to spend time on, you can do that. And as you and I prepared to have this conversation, I had this, I don't know why I hadn't thought about it before. First book I ever wrote was when my husband got fired, right? Like, our family was devastated. And yet that meant that he was around more and I had more time. And in the darkest season of our entire marriage was when I took the biggest step forward in who God was calling me to be. And so I want somebody to hear that. I want some wife to think, okay, if things do stop and I do have extra time, maybe this is my space. But as you said earlier, boy, you better be talking through that with your
Yeah.
spouse, right? Like, as everything is shifting and changing, we got to be talking about, okay, how do our roles change here? What do you need from me? How much emotional support do you need? I mean, there's a lot to consider, but again, this time it really can be a gift and not just a burden.
Yeah. Yeah. I similarly, I was already moving towards this, working remotely on, shifting from trying to find a job every time we moved to finding a job that was online that I could do anytime we moved, and had started working for my marketing company, which I adore my job, but it started out as 5 hours a week just working as a virtual assistant, and just knowing that and I was open to whatever could happen, even if it meant taking on 6 clients and just having 5 hours a week for each of them. But I had been blogging since Elijah was born, and so at that time I think it was like 10 years at that point. 10 or
Wow.
yeah, and 12 years maybe. I have to look, but and one line in my entire profile, like, oh, I blog for the Glorious Table. I was submitting monthly devotionals. My marketing, my boss, my now boss, was like, yeah, I would like her, because he knew if she's a strong writer, I can develop her into a content marketer.
Mhm.
Even, and within 2 months or so, he had me writing for his blog, and now my title's content strategist, and I hold my own accounts, and I'm a digital marketer, and it's a career that I love, that I had no idea even existed in the, I went to college, like, before the internet really even was a thing. I mean, I got my first email address my sophomore year in college. So, these things where, like, the God knew, and he connected me with this client right when I needed it, because we ended up moving shortly after that. Ordell had he left college football, and we ended up moving into high school football, and I ended up essentially moving into full-time work, but nothing with my job changed at all, because I was already working remotely. And we moved three times with this, and I've had this job, and it just hasn't been an issue, and it's been great. And that job, like, I've developed my writing skills, but then that also put me on the radar of the woman who edited my book. And the whole reason this whole thing came together was because of that tiny little window where, our life was in chaos, and we were transitioning. And I just think there is something about God saying, you know what, if you can just cling to me in this tiny, hard little, what feels to you like a mountain, but is really just a molehill, there's a beautiful opportunity on the other side of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but one thing I forgot to say, like, we keep saying the word calling a lot, but we can define that a lot of different ways. And so I wanted to just give my definition of calling, which is, how I define calling is the non-negotiable thing placed in you by God to glorify Him. And so there's a lot of passages in Scripture that talk about our giftings, and but we understand our calling by understanding our gifts and strengths and talents, and our callings are unique to us. And so Romans 12:6-8, 1 Corinthians 12:8-10, and 28-30, and Ephesians 4:11 are some Bible passages that speak specifically to spiritual gifts. But I also think that when we layer in our unique wiring, and so, like, our preferences, and the things that are our talents, whether that's athletic ability, or the way we can put together an outfit, whatever it is, like, we all have these specific ways that God has designed us for such a time as this. And so those all play into our calling. And I think that, we can sometimes minimize those things when our husbands have these big jobs where they're impacting lives. And, there's that Billy Graham quote that can really make you feel like, oh, well, I'm not impacting an entire generation, so therefore my calling just must not mean as much. But in reality, like, because God knows us all by name, like, our callings are all important. And so, if this is that opportunity to do something you wouldn't normally have the time for, like,
Right.
seize the day, seize the day. And so, but at the same time, we will also want to make sure to be wise about it. And so, Ann, you're a trained therapist, and I have I used to be a health coach in a former job, but so I have this burnout training, systematic stress management burnout training, and it's just something we're both attuned to, in the sense of, like, there has to be this layer of self-care that comes with everything. And so we wanted to make sure to talk not only about communication, but being attentive to self. And so we've kind of talked about self-care, but is there something in particular that you find for you has been helpful in this season for self-care, or?
Well, I think so. Before I started writing and speaking, I was a therapist for 14, 15 years, mental health therapist, a marriage and family therapist. And I think that the biggest thing is that, um, well, it's kind of circling back to the beginning of our conversation. Like, if God is a God who set a Sabbath, and God is a God who said he would give Moses rest,
Mhm.
we can't pretend to not be designed by someone that set those standards, you
Yeah.
know? And being coaching families, sometimes we're married to men that we have to say, hey, it does not say take a Sabbath except for football coaches, right? Like we have to remind them, like, we're human. And I think I, I think a lot of people are pretty tuned into, okay, what are some activities that make me feel like I feel like I'm feeling better. We know we need to sleep. We know we need to exercise. We know we need to eat right. Like these things are all there. I think one of the areas, because this conversation specifically is about us stepping into our calling. And for you and I, that has been a little bit of your career, right? And then this writing thing, it's very much for me
Mhm.
been writing and speaking, but it could be a million things for anybody who listens to this. I think one of the biggest areas of self-care that's been helpful is to find other women who are trying to function in that same space. Like just a couple days ago, there was a thread of women who are all Christian writers, and
Mhm.
there was somebody who said, where did my inspiration go? Like, have I lost my gift? Have I whatever? And then woman after woman that was like, me too, me too, me too, me too, right? So whatever it is that God's
Mhm.
calling you to do, I don't know, he's calling you to homeschool, he's calling you to make an Etsy shop, he's calling you to get your master's degree, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is that these women have been thinking about. Oh gosh, I really should go do that. Find your village. As
Mhm.
coaches' wives, we absolutely, right? We get on our Facebook groups and we find each other, and that's our village of people that are like, yes, absolutely, that's happening in my house, that's happening in my house. So whatever that calling is too, I don't know you're gonna go start a restaurant, I don't know what you're gonna do, but find your people who have had to walk the same path, because then they are going to speak into the obstacles that you're going to face, because there's nothing new under the sun, right? That's scripture too. Whatever you run into, whatever struggles you're going to get into, someone's been there before you. So don't walk it alone. I think that's probably been the most important thing about self-care specific to stepping into my calling as anything else.
That is wise advice. Yes. And I would like for me that layer is accountability as well.
Mm,
So that's, that writing group is a mastermind group who is holding me accountable to continuing to move forward in my writing. But also checking in with, people on Voxer and like, hey, what's going on with this? Or, I have a question about this blog post and, what
yeah.
did you think about that? Um, the other thing is it kind of gives you your like your your point of truth. Because there's going to be a lot of people who are going to say, here's why this is going to fail, or this is why this is going to succeed. But if they haven't walked your path, that may not be true.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I think that's really wise. Um, I think the other thing I would say for self care is like the routine. I found myself like really grumpy even though we were all like Ordell was joining me for all my walks and it was so great because like we never get to do this together. And then I realized like I actually like walking by myself because it's
Huh?
time where I get to listen to podcasts and I kind of catch up on all these things and I was like, I'm out of my routine. Like I have this set routine for a reason because I have a lot that I need to get done through the day and this is kind of my mental like
Mm-hmm.
point, and so I mean he does still occasionally join me for walks, but I needed to actually do my walk at 6 in the morning, not at 10 in the morning when I was taking a break from work so that we could do that together. And I
Yeah.
just needed to get back into my real life routine. And so, if you find you can do that check-in and find, this should on paper be better because we're actually spending more time together, but in reality, it's not working. It's not working, and that's okay, right?
Well, the coaching life breeds a lot of independence in
It
us.
does. Yeah.
And then when they show back up, it's like, well, hold on now. I gotta reconfigure this. I gotta fit you back in where it's gonna work for both of us. We
Right.
cannot just 24/7 it together.
Right. Well, and I mean, we walk together on the weekends, but I still have a job. Like I'm still having to work, 8 to 5 or whatever. And so if I was taking out that hour in the middle of the day, that just extends my work day. So
Right.
that's not helpful for me.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, it was my own doing. I mean, it wasn't him. It was just, I thought this is so great. And then I ended up, it just wasn't. So, it was my
Well,
own.
I think what you said about feeling grumpy, like we need to, I think that's a good indicator of when self-care is. Sometimes we criticize ourselves when we're like, why am I feeling grumpy? Or why am I feeling sad? Or why am I any of the like quote unquote negative emotions, right? That's
Mm,
just information. Like we can't categorize our emotions. They're information and they're telling you something's off. So instead of being like, I don't want to be grumpy, I don't want to be sad, and just rejecting stuff, like that doesn't work. You bury
yeah.
emotions, they pop back up as weeds, right? And so it's a good thing to, even if it doesn't feel good, to check in with it and be like, okay, what's causing this so that I can be proactive about it.
Yeah. That's a great point. So wise, Anne. Yeah, this is why I like having you on, Boxer.
You're funny. Hey, I don't know where you're headed next, but let's pause for just a second. Will you talk about your book? Like, will you talk about, because I know writing is a calling, but at some point in your head,
Mhm.
there was this space where you were like, there's a need and I want to speak to that. Like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the thing that you were like, I want people to hear this message because I know that there's a need there.
Yeah, so we were actually at the marriage getaway, and I've been blogging for a while and kind of just answering whatever questions came my way from other coaches' wives. But we had been asked to give like just a short testimony. You and Tim were the
Yep.
speaker, and Ordell and I just were supposed to talk about like what ministry looks like for us. And we were praying about it. And I just said, like, it had been a very long journey of trying to find, I guess, my voice within what coaching looks like. But, there's a lot of external people and voices that tell you like, how you need to be or where you, like, what this should look like. And I think it kind of depends on where you are, but definitely where we were with small college football in small communities, there was a lot of people had a lot of opinions about things. And so it took a long time to kind of find me and not be them. And, or to try to please them, I guess would be the way to say it. And so I just wanted to say that to the wives there was, just bloom where you're planted and you have a calling. And I just knew that that's what I needed to say. And I just kind of said it and just kind of even felt silly saying it because I thought, well, I'm the only person who's had to learn this lesson. I don't, and felt a little embarrassed. And then I went back to talk to you because you'd said something about writing, and I
Right.
tap on my shoulder and turned around, and this woman just embraced me, and she was very choked up, and she said, no one's ever said that to me. And I was kind of surprised, and I looked past her shoulder, and there was a whole line of women. And I think I kind of like passed up the next woman to you, and maybe but it was just kind of this like line of women who just were like, it was either thank you, I really needed to be reminded of that, or I've never had anyone tell me that I can also be a part of this, or no one's ever said that to me. And it just, and something just kind of rose up in me, and I was like, oh, we're going to fix this. I mean, this is just ridiculous, and I had already started the process of taking a lot of what I had been writing blog wise and trying and looking at it with harmony and saying, is there something more here? And I, in sharing that with her, it kind of rose up in her as well. And just, and then it was, this is not just for coaches' wives. Like, this is how ministry wives feel, and this is how military wives feel, and this is how pastors' wives and even like wives of CEOs can feel this, like, your husband is so big and in the room that there's no space for you. And I was even able to interview Deb DiPietro. Her husband is just retired as the president of the University of Tennessee. And, she had so much wisdom to share. And so the first part is kind of this combination of my story, but also all these wives who have also figured out, like, hey, this is my calling, and I'm going to figure out how to pursue it with my husband in partnership. And they've really learned how to do it well. And no one's story was at all similar. So other coaches' wives, but then also military wives and ministry wives. And then the rest of it is how to do this without burning out, how to do this well when you're raising kids. And then just kind of some nuts and bolts, like, hey, you're going to have to be hospitable at some point. Like, part of your title, part of your role is still partnering with your husband, and that's going to involve like serving people, and possibly that's even going to be serving them in your homes. And so here's some practical application for that I've gleaned through the years. And so and talk about, and I do address, like, here's some pitfalls that can come into your marriage, and here's some things that you should be attentive to avoid what was pretty challenging for us. And also, here's some things that we've learned with our kids who are now going to be 8th grade and sophomore in high school, and they've had some really, really hard moves. And also they're biracial, and they've lived in 2 very, very white communities prior to this, and so we dealt with some things. And so, and just here's some stuff that we've learned, and here's some things to consider as you're moving your family around the country. And but in every aspect, though, it's constantly just reminders, like, this is what God taught us in this season, and this is what God taught us in this season. And then using just the practical application of, like, when God placed me in this role as a stress management counselor, like, I learned a lot about burnout. So here's what you should know about this. And, when I was working as a virtual assistant, here's something I found really helpful with clients that I now use for myself. So here's the tool. Now you should use it. And so I'm just kind of like all those different crazy jobs I've had as a coach's wife along the lines. Like, I took all the best tips of that and put them together for you guys as well. And so that's actually one of the pre-order offers. But and then there's a whole, like, pursuing your calling action plan as well. And just, like, one way to consider figuring out what God has for you, if it works for you. So
right, absolutely. I'm so excited about it.
Well, and you are amazing help. But, like, hey, Ann, does this make sense? Like, every chapter. And read this. Does this make sense? Because I can't edit it anymore. So
that's why you need your village, right?
Yes, that's exactly why you need your village. So you are awesome in that process. And I think that's one of the great things about just having people who know your heart in a situation, is that they can be your cheerleaders and also say, hey, you forgot this part. You're not being courageous enough here. And you do need those people who are going to push you a little further.
Right.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah. But so if there's so on that, like, one of the things we both said we wanted to make sure to say is to not be ashamed to pursue your call. And I think that goes right along with what, this has been a hard season as far as, like, I can't believe I have to, like, promote a book. Like, this is insane, But like I worked really hard on it, and it's been like a 2.5 to 3 year journey, and I'm not going to peter out at the end here.
Right.
And so, but I also want to do it with boundaries and wisdom. And, if I get too exhausted and Anne tells me that maybe I need to go talk to a counselor, I'm gonna, because I trust her as a friend. But I also know that she knows way more about these things than I do. And so I'm not going to hop on Google and try to refute her. I'm going to say, this is someone who knows more about this, and I'm going to trust her because I respect her in this. And so, I think that we just need to have some common sense and some in that. And like, these are people we've invited into our lives to speak wisdom for us. And so we need to trust our circle when we're in tough seasons as well.
Well, and as you bring that up, I mean, because we're talking about coaching and being a coaching family in a time where we're going to get hit with some things we've never been hit with before, potentially. Like, coaches find a lot of identity in being coaches. And it is a heavily masculine field where sometimes feelings are not as welcome as maybe they are other places, right? And I don't think that I'm actually in the middle of putting a article together about when, not if, mental health and football collide, because they will. They absolutely will. You cannot have that level of dedication and emotion and energy and teamwork and heartbreak and victory and all those things. And the very fact that, a significant portion of our population deals with mental health issues anyway, and so we know from being behind the lines that we will see coaches' wives say, my husband is having panic attacks daily. What am I supposed to do? We have a quarterback who was expressing suicidality. What do I do with that? Like, that's the reality. We can't pretend that this life, just because it's sometimes lived in a fishbowl and very publicly, that we're just okay all the time. And so whether it's us taking care of ourselves or our husbands struggling through what could be the most difficult season they've ever encountered, maybe because it doesn't exist or it takes breaks, or all these athletes, these poor seniors that thought this was going to be their year and then maybe they don't get to play. Like, there's a lot to work through there. And so know your resources, know your people that are in your community who can be helpful, know your school counselors, get more comfortable with it yourself. Look at, there's plenty of resources out there about masculinity and mental health anyway. I just think we need to be especially aware of that, facing what we're facing this fall that's just so unusual.
And that's really good advice. I don't know that I would have known to research that phrase. So that's really helpful. And I will make sure to share that article when it.
Great. That will make me write it.
Yeah.
It's only in my head.
Oh no, that's really helpful, because I can definitely see that. And yeah, we definitely have both heard from wives where whether it's the quarterback or just another high profile player, the pressure gets to them. And even high school players are dealing with the social media pressure. And
Right.
So yeah, and certainly our coaches are the Monday morning quarterbacking is just incessant. And so, and there's only so much we can do just to, sometimes our voice of saying, they don't know the whole story just gets drowned out with all the critics.
Yeah.
That can be really tough. But I think, I think if there's one final thing I could say is just to remember that Moses was insistent that he wasn't going to take a step without God,
Mm-hmm.
and that God affirmed that. But we also know that God, we are allowed free will. And so, for example, one of the stories I highlight in my book is the story of Jonah. Well, Jonah took a lot of steps without God, and God led him. And so I would encourage you to be attentive, to acknowledge that you want God to be with you, and to ask him, invite him into that part of your relationship. Because just like us, God, that's part of a relationship. God wants to be acknowledged. It shouldn't be an assumption. Because, we do get to make our own decisions, and Jonah sure did, and it didn't work out so great for him. And so he ended up in the bottom of an ocean. And so,
Right.
in the belly of a whale. But I think that, we can learn from Moses that we can pray those bold prayers, and God will not only answer them, but he will go above and beyond. And so that's just my encouragement, that we do have a calling, and that God will walk with us in it. And that I want to believe that even in this hard season, that there is something good that will come out of it for all of us.
Yes.
Even if we can't see it right now. And so I hope that we will hear a whole bunch of stories about women who said, all right, I'm going to start praying this, and I'm going to start taking these tiny steps, even if it's just setting SMART goals and saying, I'm going to make this one choice today to start to pray about pursuing my calling, or to ask God to reveal something, or, whatever that might be, or to have that hard conversation with my husband, which turns out not to be so hard.
Yeah.
About, that courageous conversation about stepping more into my calling. And that we're going to start to see some women start to just flourish in some exciting new ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, we're back to that narrative, right? Like, what do we want this season to be? Do we want to be a victim of it, or do we want to have victory in it? And I think that's where we've got to say that we know that we serve a God who wants us to be victorious, and he has enough provision to take us through 2020, no matter what 2020 becomes, or 2021, or whatever else we're looking at. There is space for just so much growth during this time, rather than being beaten down. And I hope that they own that and move forward with that.
Mm-hmm. Me too. Any last thoughts?
No, just that, anybody hearing it, right? You matter.
Yes.
And even if, here's the thing, callings don't necessarily even have to be that public, right? Like, sometimes people talk about calling as though, like, you need like this huge audience, or you need to be the CEO of a company, or you need to whatever. It's just everybody has that thing that you're like, you know what, God's been knocking on me about this for a while.
Yep.
And I spent so long not listening and not opening that door. And the growth in me and in my relationship with God, and even in my relationship with my husband, like, maybe that's a message to coaches' wives. Like, I think there's some fear. Well, gosh, if I start doing all these other things, we've kind of got this system going. Is that going to mess with the system? It has blessed my husband to watch me do what I was designed to do. And I think you can count on that. Like, they love us, and they're and our guys, they're coaches. So for them to see somebody be like, hey, I've got a goal and I'm going to go for it, they just get all jazzed about it. So whatever it is, like, do it. Just do it. Just do it. Don't wait any longer.
Yeah. And I think that you will feel so much better about where you're headed, because you'll be in line with what you're created to be doing.
Yes.
That even if it's more challenging, or you run into these bumps in the road, it won't feel the same defeat, because you'll know that God's with you in a different way. Than if you're just doing a job because you have to be doing the grind of a job. And, you know, and honestly, like, is marketing my calling? No. But the telling of stories, and you know, and elevating stories in a way that helps others shine, yeah, that is a part of my calling. And that I can look at that part and know that that is something that I love and I thrive in. And so, you know, there's aspects of my job I love and other parts where like I don't like analytics, but I do it and I'm learning a lot through it. And I know that doing it well helps me tell a better story.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's aspects that we can also learn about that as well.
Yeah.
But I will be letting you guys know more about my pre-orders, but one of them is the that 7 steps to pursuing your calling that you can actually get started on before you even get the book in your hands, and you can just download that with your pre-order receipt. And so hopefully we'll have a link here soon, and you guys will be able to get started on that in the next couple weeks or even next week, and then you'll have the book in your hands by the end of August.
Yay, that's fun.
Yeah. Thanks for your time today, and I'm excited for them to learn more about you in Lessons from the Sidelines as well.